Dr. Joel Fuhrman is a board-certified physician whose groundbreaking work has been acclaimed as a medical breakthrough for weight loss, disease reversal, and prevention.
The American diet today has 62% of calories from processed foods. How many of you would like a promise that you don't have to have a heart attack when you get older?
He's a New York Times best-selling author and a widely published nutritional researcher.
And I see people putting this into practice every day, transforming their lives. Never forget that your health is your greatest wealth.
Join Dr. Joel Fuhrman now and learn the 3 steps to incredible health.
Welcome. Welcome to Say No to Heart Disease and Diabetes. And I'm Dr. Joel Fuhrman, a board-certified family physician and nutritional researcher. And I'm here to tell you that the major illnesses that kill Americans, especially heart attacks and strokes, are preventable and even reversible. We're going to go through some of this information today and give you the power so you don't have to have heart disease, you don't have to have strokes, you can say no to those diseases. To start out, 27% of Americans die of heart disease. 6% die of strokes. It doesn't have to happen. About every 30 seconds, another person drops dead of a heart attack. Really, it's really sad. Think about this for a minute. This slide was cut and pasted from the American Heart Association's website. It shows that heart attacks in America 100 years ago hardly even existed. Yet today, it's the leading cause of death in America. Can you imagine if most populations in the history of the human race never heard of heart disease, yet it's the most common cause of death in the modern world today, and it's increased as people have gained more weight, and overweight and obesity is spread throughout the modern world. I've taken a lot of time and attention to study the nutritional habits of people all over the world in the last 50 years. Here's a slide that demonstrates, if we look at the amount of unrefined plant foods consumed by a population, the small amount consumed in America, obviously Americans only consume about 10% of unrefined plant food. We're talking about fruits, vegetables, beans, nuts and seeds, a small amount in the American diet. And we consume mostly in America processed foods and animal products. That comprises about 90% of the total caloric intake in America comes from the combination of processed foods and animal products. Now, I said we have that 10% amount of unrefined plant food, but if we add up the causes of death, heart attacks, strokes, and cancers, we get a figure of about 80% of people dying of that combination of heart attacks, strokes, and cancers. Now, hear what I'm saying here. We're combining that high amount of processed foods and animal products, that low amount of produce, and the high amount of deaths of heart attacks, strokes, and cancers. What I did now is I looked at populations that consumed higher amounts of produce, more plant foods, more fruits and vegetables, more beans, and as they went up to 20% of calories, that combined number of those killer diseases that killed most Americans started to drop down. And as the plant foods got higher and higher, populations like Venezuela, Greece, Korea, Thailand, Laos, right? As we looked at countries, Mozambique, countries that had higher amounts of plant foods, we saw these diseases of nutritional ignorance. The modern killer diseases drop down to very low levels. But to make this slide look really good and show the good correlation between plant food and lower rates of heart attacks and diabetes, I had to go back in time and get statistics from the 1970s from these countries that were eating higher amounts of plant foods. Because what happened was, in more recent years, even those countries that used to eat more produce and more fruits and vegetables are now eating more processed foods like we are. And we're seeing in those almost all areas of the world, we're seeing an increase in heart disease and strokes and cancers because they're copying American habits. So this slide is a little bit incorrect because we can't duplicate it based on 2010 statistics. It's sad. You know, and the thing to remember here is that exposure to medical care does not have a major effect at reducing the risk of or death from these diseases. Matter of fact, medical care costs are climbing and we're not getting better outcomes. Between 2002 and 2005, medical care costs increased 57% just in that 3-year period. Amazing, right? And the Kaiser Family Foundation and other scientific authorities have studied this and they've come to the conclusion that more than half of medical expenditures are spent on services that don't improve people's health at all. Matter of fact, in America, we spend twice as much on health care compared to any country around the world. And we have the worst healthy life expectancy in this country. The most overweight people, the higher rates of cancer, and higher rates of heart disease. Spending more money on medical care does not buy you better health care outcomes. Now, what if, though, just think about this for a minute. What if there was a way to eat that tasted great, that was delicious, that would dramatically lower cholesterol, that would lower blood pressure, that would protect against heart disease more effective than medications? What if that was true? What if you could avoid angioplasty and bypass surgery, if nobody needed that anymore? What if those people that had atherosclerosis to the extent that was causing chest pain, that would have been candidates for these interventions like angioplasty and stent placement or bypass surgery, what if you could reverse that coronary artery disease that was already there? What if it could be melted away? What if diabetes could be reversed? What if people could lose weight and have their diabetes go away? What if all this could happen just by people changing the way they eat, right, to a diet style that they enjoy just as much, but afforded them those profound results? You know? So here's what I'm saying to you. Here's my clinical experience of the last 20 years, is that people with heart disease do get completely better. And once they're better, they have the rest of their life to live free of heart disease. That I've seen patients over the last 20 years, hundreds of them, that have come to my practice with chest pains, on medications, on blood pressure drugs, on cholesterol-lowering medications, on nitrates and calcium channel blockers and other drugs that try to lessen chest pain. I've even seen them after their angioplasties and bypass surgeries have failed, and these people have still been able to reverse their heart disease, have their chest pains go away, and have the subsequent tests show that the reversal of atherosclerosis is occurring, and it's occurring effectively. And it's not just evidence from my clinical practice. There are other doctors getting similar results with similar approaches. And we know from studies around the world, they're called epidemiologic studies, where they follow populations who eat differently than we eat in America. And we have cultures of people that never experience heart disease, never experience strokes, right? Even some of the studies coming out of China show when the rural Chinese who are on a high vegetable-based diet, they followed them for many, many years, and we see areas where thousands of people live, and nobody has heart attacks. It's not an incredible claim, and it's not an unbelievable statistic to give people the idea that heart disease just doesn't have to happen. Let's go over the biggest contributors to heart disease. Let's review what you have to achieve if you don't want to have a heart attack, right? How many of you would like to take the challenge that I'm offering to you today and say to me, you know what? I'm not going to have a heart attack, right? Isn't that something you may want? Well, I'll tell you how you have to achieve it, right? Because it's not that easy to achieve, but if you devoted to it, dedicated, you can achieve it. Here's what you have to achieve. Number one, you can't smoke cigarettes. Big, right? You have to quit cigarette smoking. You have to quit right now. Number two, you have to have normal lipids. That means normal cholesterol level. We say 150 over 100, which means your total cholesterol should be below 150, and your LDL, the bad cholesterol, should be below 100. But here's the kicker. You have to achieve that without medication to be totally protected. If your cholesterol is normally high with no medication, and you have to have medications to reduce it, that might lower risk a little bit, but the most effective way you can prevent heart disease with the best security not to have a heart attack is to have your diet and exercise program be so ideal that you achieve normal cholesterols without the need for medication. Number three, high blood pressure is a risk. Same thing. You have to achieve normal blood pressure. If you're overweight, if you're eating poorly, salting a lot of food, you could have high blood pressure. You can't have that anymore. Number four, you can't have diabetes. You have to have normal sugars. To get rid of diabetes, you have to eat right, a high nutrient diet, nutrient density, right? And you can't be overweight. The secret of this program is this high nutrient density diet focuses on fruits and vegetables and beans and nuts and seeds and berries and mushrooms and onions and all these foods that are relatively low in calories but high in micronutrients. And the more you eat those foods that are high in micronutrients, the more it suppresses your appetite, lessens your hunger, and has you lose weight. And one of the factors you need to achieve to not have heart attack is to have a normal weight. You can't have abdominal obesity. The bigger your waist is, the higher your risk of a heart attack or a stroke or even cancer. So you have to have a normal waist measurement. So to achieve a normal waist regimen, you have to eat a high micronutrient diet. And we see their weight melts away as their blood pressure drops and as their diabetes melts away. Number 6, you have to have a sufficient consumption of vegetables. You have to have a sufficient consumption of nuts and seeds. Number 7, because the combination of the high vegetables, especially green vegetables, they make the body, they arm these defense systems, not just to prevent cancer, but also to prevent heart disease. Number 8, lack of exercise. Once you're eating right and feeling good and your weight's dropping, you're going to feel like exercising. I know it's hard for a lot of people in bad physical condition, don't feel like exercising. And they're fatigued all the time because of their poor diet. Or their joints hurt, or they just don't, So the point is that you'll be able to increase your exercise more and more as you eat better, as you lose weight, as you're feeling better, and as you're getting healthier. So you have to have a degree of exercise tolerance to be able to be well and have extended longevity and push the envelope of human longevity with none of these killer diseases. And the last one, you have to get rid of the salt shaker. You can't have all these processed foods loaded with salt. We can review that again. And this seems like a high, a lot of achievement to achieve all these parameters of good health. But I mean, that's the key. You want to achieve these parameters. It sounds like it's hard to do, but it's not as hard as you think, because nutritional excellence is just an incredible power to enable you to control these health parameters. Now the question is, was this idea of eating a diet rich in micronutrients, a lot of vegetables and beans and nuts and berries and mushrooms, was this ever tested in the medical literature? Or is it just all complete theory? Or just clinical case studies with no documented evidence? And no, there's documented evidence. There was a medical study published on this diet style in 2003 in the medical journal Metabolism. It showed that people who followed this method of eating or this diet style reduced their LDL cholesterol 33%. And that 33% reduction on the high nutrient density diet was more powerful than what people generally get from taking cholesterol-lowering drugs. Of course, compared to other diets, low-fat vegetarian diets, American Heart Association's diet, Mediterranean diet, other high-protein diets, those didn't get anywhere near the benefits as the high nutrient density diet did in lowering cholesterol. So it's the most effective way you can lower your cholesterol is with this way of eating, even more than medications. And the take-home message is that when you do this way, when you do use this dietary method to lower cholesterol, then your weight falls off you as a side effect. Then your blood pressure drops. Then your body is perfused with these micronutrients that have a beneficial effect on protecting heart disease. Then you get the opportunity to be physically active because you feel better and you breathe better and you have more energy and more vitality. So you don't get that from a drug. You take a drug to lower cholesterol and you get muscle aches and pains and you get the possibility of having liver malfunction. And you feel fatigued, you feel worse. You eat right to get your cholesterol down and you feel better and your life and a whole possibilities of life and opportunities to open up for you. And you just have more fun and activity in life. I had a medical student in my office rotating for a month because I train medical students and residents. Oh, he was a resident. In any case, one day in my practice he was taking notes on the people I saw that day, and he showed me 4 people seen in one day that each dropped their cholesterol 100 points. In other words, I have hundreds, maybe thousands of people that have dropped their cholesterol 100 points. But he just showed me 4 people he saw in one day in my practice. These were people who came back 6 weeks later after the first visit, one of which stopped their cholesterol-lowering drug, and their cholesterol still dropped 100 points off the cholesterol-lowering drug. So as you can see from this slide, most of these people, Peggy, Eugene, Keith, Maria, their cholesterol was about between 200 and 250 when they first started out. 6 weeks later, 8 weeks later on the follow-up visit, the first follow-up visit, which we get the blood test right before the visit, their cholesterol dropped about 100 points. Their triglycerides dropped, right? Their blood pressure dropped. Just amazing results. You imagine the sensation of accomplishment that these people actually feel to see that they've tried various diets, they know they had high cholesterol. They're coming to see me predominantly because they feel they're at high risk of heart disease. And I explain to them, well, you could take a medication to lower your blood pressure. You could take a medication to lower your cholesterol. But what if we could do this without medication? how much more protected you would be if you could achieve these parameters without the need for medication, and they're thrilled when they get these results. Now, I'm saying here that there are compounds actually in vegetation, like green vegetables, that facilitate the removal of atherosclerotic plaque on the inside wall of your blood vessels. Let me give you a little more information here. Because there's a system called the NRF2 system that lines the inner wall of the blood vessels. It works like this. When you develop blockages in your heart, it's not coated like peanut butter through the whole heart evenly. It's in some places you get these blockages, in other places you don't have blockages. It seems that there are areas of bifurcation or turning where the blood puts pressure on the wall, where atherosclerosis builds up, has a tendency to be laid down, to actually protect the blood vessel wall from inflammation at areas of turbulent flow. But you know, the body already has built-in mesh network to protect those areas from plaque building up. And it's called the NRF2 that prevents inflammation and plaque adhesion to areas where there's bifurcation or change in direction or turbulent flow. But this NRF2 mechanisms is fueled by the nutritional compounds in green vegetables. Green vegetables actually form this, symbiotic relationship with the human body to fuel these mechanisms that protect us against heart disease. People understand that green vegetables protect against cancer. We know that the more greens you eat, the less breast cancer you have, the less colon cancer you have, the less prostate cancer you have. But people don't recognize that green vegetables prevent atherosclerotic plaque from building up and accelerates its removal. And we know that those with the highest blood levels of lutein, and lutein is a carotenoid found in green vegetables. Lycopene is the carotenoid found in tomatoes and red vegetables. And carotene is the orange one found in sweet potatoes and carrots. So you have those lutein, lycopene, carotene. We can measure blood levels and see what people are eating. And those with the highest level of lutein, means it's a measurement of how much green vegetables they're consuming, those people have the healthiest blood vessels with no atherosclerosis at all. You don't have to have atherosclerosis. It's not the consequence of aging. It's an abnormality based on eating a diet that's not well designed for the human species. Now, the endothelial function, which means the word endothelial, it means the inner lining of the blood vessel. So it's the inner portion of that blood vessel, the endothelium, that gets inflamed. And when we study this, we can study the inflammation on certain tests, and called vasodilation tests, where they use a blood pressure cuff and see how the blood vessel responds to being under pressure. And we show that as people increase their vegetable portions each day, intravascular inflammation decreases, the endothelium becomes more calm and more mobile and more elastic and more youthful, reducing heart attack and stroke risk. As we age, it's normal to see people, or it's expected to see people's endothelium stiffen, and the inner wall of the blood vessel become hard, and the blood pressure gets higher and higher. But you know what? That stiffened blood vessel can become elastic again, can actually become to a more youthful state when you have a higher vegetable intake. That's the key, a high vegetable intake, which has these compounds that restore the elasticity and youthfulness back to your red blood cells. And what I'm reporting here are studies that come from the medical literature. That study on endothelial function and vegetable intake was published in a medical journal called The Lancet. Now, I want to talk to you a little bit about beans, because beans are another food that accelerates the reversal of heart disease and diabetes. Beans are a very important food for your health. You can eat a carbohydrate like a piece of bread or a potato, but a piece of bread or a potato, it doesn't have as much fiber as beans do. Beans are higher in fiber, and they're higher in something called resistant starch. And the combination of the fiber and the resistant starch feeds the calories into your system more slowly, so you don't have a high glucose response. It's called the glycemic effect. The glycemic effect means the sugars come into your bloodstream relatively rapidly when you're eating things like sugar or white potato or white flour. But you eat beans, it's fed into your tissues over hours, not minutes. Now, think about this for a minute. Because if a bean, let's say you have 100 calories of beans, and 80% of those calories are carbohydrate. But keep in mind, half those carbohydrates are resistant starch. So the can or the bag of beans may say 100 calories a half cup, but you're not getting 100 calories a half cup, because half of those calories counted as carbohydrate are resistant to digestion. That means the enzymes can't break them down. So they pass through the digestive tract, right into the colon, and they're broken down in the colon by bacteria into short-chain fatty acids. But the time though that resistant starch can be broken down, it's too late for them to be, all those calories to be absorbed into the body. So a large portion, maybe 40% of those calories, are lost. We don't absorb them. So when you ate the bean, you felt full. You felt like you ate a couple hundred calories. And you don't feel like eating for a long time after that. But you didn't get all the calories the body felt it took in. That's how they encourage weight loss. And because the resistant starch isn't broken down to glucose or sugar, it's actually broken down by bacteria into a short-chain fatty acid called butyrate, which is a fat. So the little bit of that fat that's absorbed into the body has a special function to accelerate the oxidation of fat, which means we lose more fat. It actually causes us to lose fat, and it also affects the speed of glycolysis. Glycolysis is a word to represent how the glycogen, the stored glycogen, is broken down to glucose for the body's utilization. Now, these are hard words. Let me explain this again. Because we eat a food like a potato, and the body breaks it down to glucose, and then we can't burn off, it stores it as glycogen. Now, as we need food again, as we're requiring fuel to fuel the body, the glycogen is broken down back into glucose again. Now, when you eat beans, what I'm saying here is it slows down the breakdown of glycogen. It slows down the breakdown of glycogen into glucose again. So that process happens slowly, keeping us not being hungry for a long time after eating the bean. It makes it so instead of burning off the glucose calories rapidly, they're burned off very, very slowly. So let's say you have lunch, and you have a salad with some broccoli or some red kidney beans or chickpeas or lentils, right? You have these foods, you have little nuts and seeds. You can eat less calories, and you won't be hungry 2 hours later. You won't be hungry 3 hours later. You won't be hungry 5 hours later. It'll make it so you don't have to snack through the afternoon. You won't feel like eating again. The secret here is beans don't give you that much calories, but they make it feel you don't feel like eating for a long time. So they're going to take away your desire to snack and take away your desire to overeat. And when we compare, so we're analyzing food based on its micronutrient density and its properties that protect us against diabetes, promote the reversal of heart disease, and accelerate your weight loss. We're talking here about designing a diet for its therapeutic implications. And so we cut back on eating potato and bread, we cut back on eating a lot of sugar and white rice, and we substitute foods that have more resistant starch in them, right? And beans are a perfect example. We call it the greens and beans diet because we want to eat a lot of green vegetables and lots of beans. Because, you know, the sterols and all the fibers in the beans and the green vegetables, they bind cholesterol in the gut, and they function like a cholesterol-lowering medication to have the cholesterol be taken out of the body, right? They reduce the storage of fat after the meal. They protect against colon cancer. All the fiber in the gut protects against colon cancer. And, of course, they make you feel full. Now, I have to talk for a minute about not a heart attack, but something called sudden cardiac death. Because a large percent of people who die of heart disease don't die of a heart attack. Heart attack is when a clot forms in the heart and the heart can't get enough oxygen. But sudden cardiac death can be a life-threatening arrhythmia where the heart goes into an irregular heartbeat and then people actually, die. And you've seen when they shock people back to life again from an irregular heartbeat. So having an irregular heartbeat leading to sudden cardiac death is the most common cause of death in people with no known heart disease. Because people have been living a perfect life, thinking they're healthy, and all of a sudden, bang, they're having their first cardiac event, and they never knew they had heart disease. They don't even know it now, because now they're dead. But here's the thing. The most proven intervention for the reduction of sudden cardiac death is the regular consumption of seeds and nuts in the diet. Can you imagine? People don't even know that. It's amazing. Right? The Nurses' Health Study, the Physicians' Health Study, the CARE Study, the Adventist Health Study, the Iowa Women's Health Study all show the same thing. All these studies show that when people ate nuts and seeds on a regular basis, they had a dramatic reduction in all-cause mortality. The word all-cause mortality, that means you're not dying from heart disease, from sudden cardiac death, even from cancer. It means all the leading causes of death were reduced. And what these studies show was a dramatic reduction in sudden cardiac death for people eating more nuts and seeds in their diet. And if you eat an ounce of nuts and seeds a day, it's been shown to reduce the LDL cholesterol significantly. It's cholesterol lowering. You eat 2 ounces, it drops your LDL cholesterol even more. And when you eat more nuts and seeds in your diet, you're getting more calories, less high glucose, high glycemic calories, and more fat calories. But the fat calorie that comes from nuts and seeds work in a completely different manner than the fat you would get from oil or animal products. Because the fat in nuts and seeds are bound to fibers. They're bound to fibers like sterol and stanols. And like the beans, all the fat calories aren't biologically available. A lot of the fat calorie is lost, passes out in the stool, because it doesn't all absorbable. And it forms like an ion exchange mechanism where you're actually, some of those good fats, the beneficial healthy fats, are being absorbed, and the sterols and stanols are acting like a sponge to suck some unhealthy fats like cholesterol and saturated fat out of the body to ferret out into your stool. Amazing, isn't it? How food has this therapeutic effect. You know, the whole concept of what causes heart disease and heart attacks have changed in recent years. You know, we used to think years ago that these blockages occurred, right? The blockages that obstructed blood from flowing through, lessening the delivery of oxygen and people getting chest pain. We used to think when we fixed these people and stretched out the blood vessels, allowing more oxygen to go through, we'd stop people from having heart attacks. But we realized it's not true. People undergoing these procedures have the same amount of heart attacks as people with the same degree of heart disease who don't undergo those procedures. We found out that heart disease or heart attacks don't occur because of the extent of the blockage. It occurs because the type of plaque in the blockage itself, and it's called vulnerable plaque or juvenile plaque. It's a softer plaque that can be moved, that's more movable. It's more newly laid down plaque. The most dangerous type of plaque is called the vulnerable plaque that has a softer base with less of a calcified cap. It can move because that kind of cap can crack, rupture, and cause a clot to form. So most heart attacks are caused by a clot, right? It causes a platelet clot, and a traveling clot is called an emboli that can go to the brain and cause a stroke. A stationary clot is called a thrombus. So what I'm saying here is that a thrombus, which is a clot in the heart, or a traveling clot or a traveling thrombus called an embolus, or in plural it would be emboli, can go to the brain and cause a stroke. And the American diet causes this high risk of having these clots occur in the heart. That is why this theory of giving people a stress test and then seeing a blockage and treating the blockage doesn't reduce heart attack risk, because the areas of the heart that are most vulnerable aren't the areas that are most blocked. So when they treat those areas that have the most blockage causing the chest pain, those aren't the spots in your heart that are likely to cause a heart attack. They're treating the wrong spots. They can make you feel a little better, allowing more blood to flow through, but because they're treating those spots in the heart that have the most blockage and they have the most calcified cap, those blockages have been there the longest. And the ones that are the oldest and have a thickened cap and are more hardened are less likely to crack, fissure, or rupture and cause the clot. In other words, doctors can't identify where those spots are, and they can't be treated. The best way to determine your risk isn't with a cardiac catheterization even, or a stress test. The stress test only detects blockages that are greater than 75%. So you could have a stress test, and the doctor you could walk out of the cardiologist's office, and he could say, you know what, your stress test is normal. And you could drop dead of a heart attack the next day. A normal stress test means nothing, because those obstructions that are 30 and 40% obstructed, not 75% that are detectable on a stress test, but those lesser obstructions that are not visible, those are the ones that are most risky, the ones that can't be seen on the stress test. So cardiology is based on outmoded and even disproven practices, because they give you a stress test to document a narrowing, and then if you have a positive test, they put you through a cardiac catheterization to see where the blockages are most severe, so those can be treated by angioplasty and bypass surgery. But I just told you that the stress test isn't even evaluating those areas of the heart that's most vulnerable to cause a heart attack. So they're treating something that doesn't protect you. And you know, even the studies follow those people treated that way with angioplasty or bypass surgery, and they're followed over years, and 5 or 10 years later, they don't have a reduction in chest pain than people who didn't undergo those procedures, who were just treated medically. And over the years, those people do not live longer. So you're undergoing expensive and dangerous procedures without documented and medically proven benefits. If you have a negative stress test, then you're giving reassurance, which you shouldn't be having reassurance, because a negative test doesn't mean you're in good health. And then they're just treating your cholesterol and your blood pressure with drugs, right? Drugs which is like a permission slip. They told you you're okay because they had a normal stress test, right? You think you're okay. But you're not really okay. You still have heart disease. Because if you're an American, and like all other Americans, you're overweight and you're eating poorly, then you have heart disease. You know, by the American authorities, they say about 67% of Americans are overweight or obese. I say about 90% of Americans are overweight, not 66%, because the ones they're considering normal weight are still too heavy. And the 10% that I'm saying of people that are of normal weight, well, more than 10% of people smoke cigarettes, or alcoholics, or have occult cancers, or have digestive disorders, or have depression, or have other reasons that account for their normal weight. In other words, what I'm saying here is that if you eat American food, if you eat like other Americans eat, it's normal to become overweight. It would be abnormal to be a normal weight, and there's probably something wrong with you if you're a normal weight eating American food. Because the American diet is designed to create disease and sickness and weight gain and obesity and diabetes. We couldn't put a diet style together to kill people better than had we designed it for that purpose. And we treat these problems with medications, and the medications are like a permission slip. Because the person who already got the authority from their cardiologist that the stress test was okay, and now just take these drugs to lower your blood pressure and lower your cholesterol. That's all you need to do for the rest of your life. It gives people the subconscious concept that what they're doing is okay. They just got to take their medications. They can keep on the same diet that's causing the disease, the atherosclerosis, to develop and their weight to get heavier and heavier. And the inevitable consequence is they died prematurely, and they didn't have to, because the cardiologist did not give them informed consent. He didn't tell them that, you know, this might lower your risk a little bit if you don't change your diet, but it's much better if you drop the weight, eat differently, lower your cholesterol naturally, get rid of your high blood pressure. Nobody sat and told that person that if they really wanted to be protected, they would make dramatic changes in their lifestyle, right? So keep in mind that cardiac interventions and cardiology, the basis of cardiology is like a scam, right? And lots of modern cardiologists know this, and a lot of them are adopting these principles, and they're trying to get people not to do the things they did in the past, right? I'm not the only person who knows this information. I'm saying here that it doesn't have to happen to you. I'm saying here that you don't have to have happen to you what happens to other Americans. You not only don't have to have heart attacks, you don't have to be going to doctors and be so addicted to medications and physicians and medical procedures and medical emergencies and emergency rooms, right? I don't know about you, but running into emergency rooms and doctor's offices is not a lot of fun. It's not fun to have reflux esophagitis from your right? And to have hemorrhoids and constipation and chest pains and be popping medications and feel lightheaded and fall down and break a hip because the medications lowered your blood pressure too low one day and you felt dizzy and you fell down. Your whole life you become revolved around your sicknesses and your diseases. And it doesn't have to be, because disease is unnatural and unnecessary. Keep in mind here, body fat kills. You have extra body fat, then you have heart disease. Then you're at high risk of cancer, right? The American diet causes the body fat to develop. But when you eat natural foods, they have preventative effects. When you eat foods like green vegetables and beans and mushrooms and nuts and seeds, it's almost impossible to gain weight. Because look, how many overweight and obese gorillas do you see? Or monkeys or monkeys running around the woods. The point is, there's no other animal eating natural foods that grow overweight. And you know what? There's no human species in human history that have overweight people in their population, except in the Middle Ages, maybe the kings and queens who had the access to processed foods or access to overeat food, maybe the wealthier people. But the point is there's almost no overweight people in the history of the human race. It's only a recent phenomenon in human history. It's very hard to become overweight eating natural foods, almost impossible. If you lived on a desert island somewhere, if you were shipwrecked, like you were shipwrecked on a desert island, have you ever watched that show Gilligan's Island, where people are shipwrecked on a desert island? Well, look, if you were on that island and you were eating berries and greens and papaya, maybe a little fish, whatever, natural foods, nuts, whatever you could find on the island, it couldn't be overweight people. And that's how you can figure out, and that's how I finally figured out, that Skipper never really lived on that island. But here's the thing. As you put more fat on your body, you put fat outside the body and you have fat inside the body surrounding your organs, strangling your digestive organs. And that fat, which surrounds your muscle tissues and your organs, causes insulin resistance. It means the insulin can't be taken up by the cells. So what does the pancreas do to respond to that? The pancreas produces more insulin. And after you start gaining more and more weight, the pancreas now might be under the demand or the stress to produce 5 times as much insulin as a person of normal weight. And after a while, the pancreas poops out and can't keep up with this huge load of insulin. So the glucose level starts to rise, and the person gets diagnosed with diabetes. So what do the doctors do? What do we do as physicians? We give people medication to make the pancreas secrete more insulin. Well, the pancreas was already overworked producing too much insulin. By pushing the pancreas with medications to produce more insulin, it causes it to poop out even more, and you become more diabetic in the years to come even faster. And the medical studies show that the more medications given to better control the diabetic's glucose, it makes their outcomes worse, their diabetes get worse, and it accelerates their cause of death. Let me say this again, that the more you take medications like insulin and the glucosinurias that cause weight gain, the pancreas to work harder to secrete insulin, even though they control your glucose better, they don't give you a better outcome. It's like if the light went off in your car and your dashboard started flashing, oil, 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 and you took your car to the mechanic, and he went in there under the hood, and he snipped the wire so you couldn't see the dashboard flashing, the flashing light on the dashboard anymore. That wouldn't be the right way to fix it. What we're doing is we're using medications to cover up the symptoms. We're lowering the blood pressure with medication, but the cause of the high blood pressure, the atherosclerosis or the stiffened blood vessels, is still there. The sugar's high because of the excess body weight. We cover it up by lowering the glucose to cause the pancreas to work harder. It's not what we need to do. You see, insulin itself is an atherogenic agent. That means insulin itself promotes atherosclerosis and weight gain. And the more you give the person diabetic insulin, the more they gain weight and become more diabetic and need more insulin. We need to give these people the information they need to take charge of their health. They need to exercise it off. They need to eat right? They need to eat the diet we're talking about here. That's low glycemic, high in fiber, high in resistant starch, high in micronutrients, high in the sterols and stanols from seeds. It's all these factors, high in these natural foods that cause diabetes to reverse itself, because more drugs mean more deaths, right? The scientific studies show that when doctors treat diabetics intensively with more medication, they don't survive as much. And the National Institute of Health had to stop the Accord study because they tried to do a study where they had doctors intervene with more drugs to lower the glucose, and the people were dying more. And the NIH stopped the study, the Accord study, because people were dying from more intensive diabetic treatment. More drugs, more deaths. Doctors are between a rock and a hard place, right? They don't know what to do. The glucose is high, but no, that's bad. More drugs aren't good, lowering with drugs aren't good, so what do we do? Well, what do we do? It's clear what we have to do here, right? You have to get people eating right and exercising. And when they eat right, they feel like exercising. Because you could be amazed by when the reduction in calories will give you more energy, not less. Because the calories are high in micronutrients, and your whole body's going to function better. You're going to think more clearly, you're going to have more energy when you wake up in the morning, you're going to sleep better, you're not going to feel inflamed in your body, your joints aren't going to hurt, you're going to have a better mental outlook, you're not going to be depressed, your brain's going to function better, you're going to be more excited about life, you're going to feel like exercising. Your whole life can come together in a way that works for you if you put together the right nutrients the body needs and is designed to be fueled by. A few caveats here and a few things I want you to consider. Number one is white potato has been shown in medical studies to increase the risk of diabetes because white potatoes have a relatively high glycemic index. Now, I eat some white potato, and white potato is not a terrible food to eat. Put it in a soup, right? But for a person with metabolic syndrome who's overweight, prone to diabetes or high triglycerides, there's much better starch choices to choose. It's much better to eat things like, corn and squashes and beans and to reduce the consumption of white potato. So be careful of that, because some studies show that even whole grains have a much better glycemic effect than white potatoes. So I don't want people to eat fried potatoes and French fries and things like that. So we're choosing carbohydrates based on certain factors that make them more diabetic favorable if you have diabetes. We're looking at the fiber content, the glycemic effect, the resistant starch percent, the nutrient density, the caloric density, and the caloric bioavailability. Remember I said when you eat a beans, all those calories aren't bioavailable. So we want to design the diet to be maximally effective for the people that are overweight and diabetic, because it helps them become non-diabetic in a short period of time. Also, not just watching white potato and white flour and sugar, but also watch egg consumption, because eggs are linked to higher risk of diabetes. Men consuming, for example, 7 eggs a week were 58% more likely to develop type 2 diabetes. So people who eat eggs on a regular basis, men who are consuming 7 more eggs a week were 58% more likely to develop diabetes, and women were 77% more likely to develop diabetes compared to people who weren't eating eggs. And those people were twice as likely to die in a 20-year period. So there's some relationship to be eating, to eating cholesterol and eggs. Now, the high nutrient density diet we're talking about here, it's very high in fiber, it's high in resistant starch, it's very low in saturated fat, right? It gives you sufficient omega-3 fatty acids. It's important. The omega-3 fats, flax seeds, walnuts, part of the diet. Delicious tasting salad dressings using nuts and seeds to give you those beneficial omega fats. And we want the diet to be relatively low in sodium too. We want people to develop the ability to get in great health. And as your health gets better, your taste gets better, you enjoy the subtle flavors of natural foods, and you realize that in the natural foods are these nutrients that they are your best medicine. Food is your most effective medicine, the right food. And when people are given this opportunity to get well, they enjoy it, and they're so grateful. They're so grateful to be able to have their health back. Take Julia. Julia is one of my patients who came to my office after having 3 heart attacks in 1 year. Can you imagine? After the 3rd heart attack, the doctor said there's nothing more they could do for her. She had lost a lot of heart function. She had overall poor circulation in many areas of the heart, and there's nothing additional they could do. She was essentially a cardiac cripple. Well, Julia, in that 1 year time, she lost 105 pounds, and she went from a cardiac cripple to a fully functioning human being with a life back, able to exercise, shopping, care for herself, enjoy her grandchildren. And I had the opportunity to be at her son's wedding and to have Julie in great health, being able to see that part of her life that she would have missed. And she's doing great. And she knows that she has the power right in her own hands now to not have to have heart disease in her future. Even though she had that damage to her heart and her ejection fraction is not 100%, her heart function came back enough and she has enough function now to live a normal life and to know that her heart doesn't have to worsen again. Because having heart disease and having heart attacks, not a natural thing. Unnatural. Doesn't have to happen. Now let me talk about strokes for a minute because it's important. Because there are 2 types of strokes. There are hemorrhagic strokes and there's embolic strokes, and they're completely different. The hemorrhagic stroke is a bleed, and it could be quite severe and quite devastating, and people could die from it or be paralyzed for the rest of their life. And the hemorrhagic stroke is not caused by the same factors that cause the embolic stroke or the ischemic stroke, which is like a heart attack. The ischemic stroke or the embolic stroke is like a heart attack because it's formed by a clot that travels into the brain or is formed in the brain. And those strokes are bad, and they have the same causes of heart disease. But as your cholesterol goes down and as you eat right, it doesn't protect you against hemorrhagic stroke. It only protects you against embolic or ischemic stroke. The point I'm making now is that if you still eat a diet that's relatively heart disease protective, it's not going to protect you against hemorrhagic stroke if you use a lot of salt on your food. Because a hemorrhagic stroke isn't caused by a clot. It's caused by a break. And the breakage occurred, the fragile blood vessels in the brain could occur to a person who has no atherosclerosis. So the point here is watch your salt intake. Right? We don't want people like in Japan for all those years. In Japan, they had a quarter of the heart attack rate as America. They already had heart attacks compared to in America for years and years and years. But they had 10 times a higher risk of stroke than we did because they had so much more salt in their diet. We don't want people to switch from a high heart attack risk to a risk of hemorrhagic stroke because they're doing all the right things but they're not taking the salt out. All right? So it's very important to watch your salt intake too. Because the major causes of high blood pressure are processed foods. Processed foods contain a lot of factors that raise blood pressure in addition to the salt. They cause inflammation in the blood vessels, and they accelerate the buildup of atherosclerosis and stiffening of the blood vessels. But of course, most salt in America is consumed in processed foods and restaurant foods and fast foods, baked goods and sweets. But the main cause of high blood pressure are the processed foods, the baked goods, the sweets, and animal products. Because animal products do not contain phytochemicals and antioxidants, and they're not a high micronutrient-containing food, and they're often high in saturated fat. And even the animal protein, even too much animal protein, raises cholesterol levels. I'm telling you this because the same diet that reverses heart disease and reverses diabetes is going to lower your blood pressure. Because blood pressure medications, like diabetic medications, are not all they're cracked up to be. The first number is called the systolic number, systolic blood pressure, and the second number called the diastolic. The blood pressure medications push the systolic number down, and they push the diastolic number down. Now, as we get older, it's normal for the stiffened blood vessel, as we get older and heart disease increases the risk, and the blood vessels become stiffer and stiffer. It's like the heart pumps, and you're pushing the blood through a stiff, narrow pipe. So, of course, it comes out at higher pressure. And the stiff, narrow pipe, when the heart relaxes in diastole and the blood pools, a normal, elastic, more youthful blood vessel is supposed to contract and come in during diastole and expand during systole, and contract during diastole and expand during systole. But because the blood vessel is stiff, it's not coming in, it's not going out, it's just stuck there. So during diastole, the blood pressure goes too low as we get older. It drops lower and lower. And it's called pulse pressure. The word pulse pressure is the difference between the top number and the bottom number. And as we get older, that number widens. It goes further apart. The top number goes higher, and the bottom number goes lower. And the wider your pulse pressure, the higher your risk of sudden cardiac death, and the higher your risk of death. A widened pulse pressure is predictive of having a heart attack about to happen. The problem with medications are that they push the diastolic number down even lower. They widen the pulse pressure as they lower the blood pressure. When you lower your blood pressure with diet and exercise, it pushes the top number down, and it causes the bottom number, the elasticity, to restore itself. So you actually keep the pulse pressure narrow. A good blood pressure, like 120 over 80, the difference between the 120 and the 80 is only 40 points. If your blood pressure is 120 over 60 or 130 over 50, that's widening. That's not a good thing. Blood pressure medications reduce the diastolic blood pressure as they reduce the systolic blood pressure. And the studies show that people with low diastolic blood pressure forced by medication have 3 times the heart attack rate and 3 times the rate of increased irregular heartbeats. It causes atrial fibrillation. It can cause all types of increased risks. They're not harmless things to take these medications to lower your blood pressure. It's much safer if you got rid of the high blood pressure through diet and exercise. And overall, medications give people this permission slip, the psychological idea that they're protected, so they think they can eat whatever they want, or at least continue the same diet style they were eating that caused the problem to begin with. So look, all these medications have side effects. I can go through every class of medications. Even beta blockers that are very commonly used, they lower the blood pressure in the arm, but not in the central nervous system, in the brain, where the stroke's going to occur. It's like, so they give you the impression your blood pressure is good, and your blood pressure all over the body is not even that good. So they have, it's called pseudo-antihypertensive effects, because they fail to lower the blood pressure in the central nervous system. So these commonly prescribed drugs all have side effects. Certain medications for blood pressure increase the risk of kidney cancer, right? Certain medications cause swelling in your feet, cause fatigue, cause people to fall over from lower blood pressure, causing a hip fracture. Side effects hurt your quality of life. When you eat right, you don't have side effects. When you eat right, you get benefits without all those extra risks thrown in. Medications are not the answer to what ails our nation. More money to spend on medical care and more drugs aren't the answer. The answer is to adopt a high nutrient density diet full of vegetables, the colorful vegetables, tomatoes and onions and beans and berries and eggplants and peppers and squashes, right? We want a colorful diet. We want to devise this diet using nutritional science and using the culinary and using the healthy cuisine from the best chefs in the world to make it taste great, right? High in fiber, high in nutrients, all the factors that make for great health. A micronutrient-rich diet is the secret to a long, healthy life, free of heart disease, free of diabetes, right? Free of high blood pressure, freeing up your dependency on doctors and drugs. I did a research study, a pilot study. We took diabetic patients and we put them on this high nutrient diet, and all the patients came off their diabetic medications, all of them. The average hemoglobin A1C, and the hemoglobin A1C was 7.7 on medication. It went to 5.7 in the non-diabetic range off medication. Triglycerides normalized, and the average systolic blood pressure dropped in the group that we studied from 145 to 115, right? We're talking here about documented benefits. And then the individual cases, and we look at these people and really what happened to them, it's heartwarming to see what happens. Take Bruce. He was a guy only 46 years old who was overweight. He was 240 pounds, and he was found to have an 80% blockage of his carotid artery through an ultrasound test. And he was told he needed an urgent carotid endarterectomy. That means either surgery to remove the blockage, because it was greater than 80%. He was a young guy, right? He lost 80 pounds, and repeated the carotid endarterectomy a year later after an 80-pound weight loss. The ultrasonographer couldn't find any blockage in his heart, in his blood vessel at all. 80% to nothing. Well, maybe there was something there, he couldn't see it, but the point is, most of it was gone, and he didn't have a problem anymore. He weighed 160 pounds. He went from 240 to 160 in 1 year, no visible plaque, excellent health, no need for medication, and his future's protected. Look at people like Tony. Tony had a glucose level of 460. Glucose level of 460 is almost below 100. His glucose level in the almost over 400. Doctors wanted to have him insulin, multiple medications, told him he was going to be on medications the rest of his life. He dropped his weight. He lost 60 pounds. Diabetes is gone, no medication. His glucose runs in the 70s and 80s now. He's not even near diabetic. He's not even pre-diabetic anymore. He's smiling, and he knows he's learned what he needed to learn to protect his health, and he knew that he was heading down a path to tragedy in his life, right? Charlotte, another example of one of these people. She weighed 260 pounds. Now she weighs 130 pounds. She lost 130 pounds. She lost half her body weight. She was sick. She had a stroke. She had diabetes. She was on all 3 of medications for diabetes. She was on insulin. Now she's on no medication, and she's moving around, active, physically fit again, out of the wheelchair. She recovered fully from her stroke, by the way. She's no longer has the problem, and she's got her life back. So exciting to see these people. And Ronnie had bypass surgery, and within 3 years, his chest pains reoccurred. And then the doctors brought him in for angioplasty. But he weighed over 300 pounds, right? His scale only went up to 300 pounds. Maybe he weighed 310 or 3, but in 1 year, after that angioplasty, Ronnie found out about this way of eating. He Googled in the internet, found me, and adopted the program. He lost 140 pounds in 1 year. He went from over 300 pounds to 160 pounds. Let me just say this again. Ronnie had bypass surgery, and 3 years later had an angioplasty because his chest pains came back. And then, within a month, he had reoccurrence of chest pain. The angioplasty and stent placement didn't work. In many cases, in a large percent of people, they get what's called restenosis, which is scar tissue and collapsing of the blood vessel where the stent and balloons are placed. And because he had bypass surgery, maybe his vessels weren't that stable, but in any case, Ronnie's heart disease was not treatable through medical procedures. The cardiologist and the interventionists couldn't help him anymore. They sent him home to die in chest pain. Couldn't help him anymore. Now Ronnie plays tennis, exercises, goes to the gym, has his life back, interacts with his family and his children. He earned back a healthy life. And Ronnie said to me, he said, you know, I want to do whatever I can to help people know this, because I don't want people to go through what I had to go through in life before I found out about how I could take care of my health with high nutrient eating, right? He's so grateful to have found this. And he was, even though I've never seen him personally, and he got this from, interacting through the internet or reading books and things, he's called me on the phone and it's such a pleasure to hear from these people and to have them send me their success stories. It was so heartwarming. But I think about it, and I think about people out there like Ronnie. I think about all these people sent home to die like Ronnie was in pain. All these people who don't know that in most cases, that medical interventions are not the answer for heart disease. They don't have the ability to reverse heart disease. These medical interventions are just temporary corks in the bottle that pop back out again. So if you look at Ronnie's statistics, his blood pressure on medication was still uncontrolled at 160. Off medication a year later, his blood pressure is 115. His waist went from 58 to 34. His cholesterol, his LDL bad cholesterol went from 148 on medication to 75 off medication. That means his LDL cholesterol 75 on no medication. The cholesterol dropped more effectively with the nutritional program than it did for medications, right? People don't have an idea how effective a well-designed diet can be because their doctors generally tell them, you have to take these drugs for the rest of your life, right? They don't give them the opportunity to cure themselves. We can cure diabetes. We can cure heart disease. And the word cure means you have normal numbers without the need for medications, right? You still have a genetic tendency to have those diseases should you gain back the weight, right? But the key thing here is we're talking about not eating a diet that's extremely low in fat. We're talking about have a body that's extremely low in fat. There's a difference here. One, people have a low body fat percent. That's the secret to getting rid of these diseases. Like Ronnie got from 300 pounds to 160 pounds. He's all muscle. He has very little fat on his waist right now. That's why he became well again. That's why the blood can flow through his heart. When you have fat on your body, you have fat in the blood vessels too, right? It can't be enforced enough that a low body fat percentage is best achieved by this nutrition prescription that gives you high micronutrients, high fiber, right? You pick these foods that are therapeutically effective reversing disease, and then you exercise with it, and the results are literally miraculous. All right, the conclusion here? The conclusion is that the nutritional advice by conventional doctors and dietitians is almost worthless. The American Heart Association's recommendation is certainly a step in the right direction, but not enough if people want complete protection. Moderation can kill, because if you allow heart disease, especially to advance, the mistake could be your life, right? So it's not just cutting out fat. It's doing all the right things here to achieve an excellent or an optimal diet. We're talking about achieving incredible health, that you can do it, and you can protect yourselves, and it will give you increased pleasure and excitement about life, freeing you up to not have to worry about your health anymore, freeing you up to devote yourself to being productive and having fun and living your life to the fullest. So I wish you a long and pleasurable life. It's available for each and every one of you.